.401 in the afternoon. It's a Wednesday. It's in Boulder, Colorado. And today we have a speaker, Jason Knudson, who's going to tell us a little bit about
technology, cybersecurity, and policies.
He's going to tell us a little bit about technology, cybersecurity, and policy. Everybody?
Technology, cybersecurity, and policy.
But he's going to take it and he's going to spin it. He's going to tell us about technology, cybersecurity, and policy in the context of innovation. I mean, how do you innovate with technology, cybersecurity, and policy? How do you effectively do that? What are some of the risks? What are the opportunities? Why shouldn't we all be frightened that there's a 19-year-old sitting somewhere who is innovating with technology, cybersecurity, and policy? I'm frightened. But Jason, he will tell us all not to be frightened. He will tell us how to innovate, and he will answer every question that you possibly have. So please welcome Jason Knudson.
Well, thank you.
You have turned on your microphone.
I did turn on my microphone. Is it going through? All right.
There will be a voice from somewhere out there.
All right.
They say, yes, it's on.
All right, so we're going to solve all the world's problems in about 45 minutes.
Why does that say?
No, it's just one of the words. So let me give you a quick background on myself. I'm a 20-year military officer, spent first 10 years as an enlisted guy, came here to CU Boulder, got a physics degree and philosophy minor, worked up at NIST, went back, got commissioned into the Navy, and started doing submarines. So I operated nuclear power plants on submarines. Got done with doing that, went and did cyber, signals intelligence, and electronic warfare, and worked at the Pentagon doing science technology. While I was there, I got picked up for a program for the Chief of Naval Operations, who's essentially the Chief Executive Officer of the Navy, for his Rapid Innovation Cell. When we met with him a year after the program was in, he looked at us and goes, I thought of you guys as a plant that I put up on a shelf, and I'm very happy to come back a year later and notice that you grew without me watering it. So from there, I ended up going to Japan, working in the fleet staff. One of the roles in Japan is to go around Asia and basically show the flag, put on big parties with every single country we go to, and do a diplomacy mission. So while I was there, I got a chance to live in Japan. I got a chance to go to Hong Kong, Singapore, China, the Philippines, Thailand, Sri Lanka, 2 spots in India. And our goal there was to do 2 things. One was to ensure the defense, the mutual defense of our countries. And the second was to ensure economic trade. This is one of the things we don't think about in defense, is to ensure economic trade. A lot of us look at ships, they look at the cool things cool gizmos, they see the World War II videos, but if you go back to the founding documents, the Constitution, the purpose of the mutual defense, the purpose of the Navy especially, is to ensure trade within our country. So from the beginning, it's not about the technology. It's really about some bigger function. And while I was doing innovation within the Department of Defense and the federal government, worked with some other agencies, Department of Homeland Security, some of the 3-letter intelligence agencies, it was really, really hard. It's amazing that a big organization like that creates an F-35, aircraft carriers, that it would be difficult to bring change and new technology into it. But that's the reality of it. And so, let's make sure. what I want you to do and think about as I'm going through these slides is think about this statement here. The tech is easy, but people are hard. And that's the reality of it. You may be banging your head against a certain technological problem, but when you go to implement it in the world, you're implementing with people, and that is the hardest part. And I don't know what just happened there, so give me a second.
That was 500,000 acres of land with...
That is my Zen.
Oh, okay.
All right. So when I talk about innovation, one of the things that I find every day in my business, which I'm a consultant, I live up in Estes Park, but I fly all over helping organizations drive innovation and bureaucracy. So first thing is, I ask them, what's your definition of innovation? I ask them it because it's a loaded question. About 5 or 6 years ago, I was trying to find out what it was, and I pulled up about 220 different definitions of innovation, and none of them matched. And so, a good friend of mine beat me to this, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Ward, who now works for a company called MITRE. He said, all innovation definitions have 2 parts to it. The first, there's a statement of novelty. Innovation has to be new. And the second is there's a statement of value. It has to bring some sort of value to that. I broke it out a little bit more. This is my definition. That innovation is a new idea, process, or thing. It's not just a technology that creates change. If you deliver a technology and nothing's changed, you haven't done innovation, and delivers value. So those cool beer hats that you see at the stadiums, right? Is that an innovation? Well, yes. It's a newer novel technology when it came to the market. It changes the way that you drink beer at football games. And there is some value there because now I can hold 2 hot dogs while I drink my beer. One thing I also like to think about is the concept of negative innovation. When we talk about innovation with novelty and value, we can talk about things having negative value. So this is one of my biggest problems with innovation definitions, is how do you define bad innovation? Everything is innovation these days. I'm going to hold that. Please keep this in your mind as you go through novelty plus innovation, or novelty plus value. So what's a bureaucracy? Who's this handsome man over here? This guy is Max Weber. Max Weber is one of the founders of sociology. He was a psychologist and was applying psychology principles to groups of people. And he came up with a way of organizing people to do things called a bureaucracy, called the theory of bureaucracy. A bureaucracy has hierarchical organization, formal lines of authority, rigid division of labor, regular and continuous execution of assigned tasks. If you read his paper on the theory of bureaucracy, though, you'll see at the very end, he goes, this is a way to do it. And my theoretical way is perfect. However, once people start applying it, you're going to have bad things happen. You're going to have people controlling power. You're going to have people using the policy in ways that they shouldn't. Everything we think that is bad about a bureaucracy, Max Weber was like, watch out. You do this, this is the consequences. So this isn't something that we designed and are implementing without knowing what the consequences are. We deliberately made a decision to the trade-off of creating bureaucracy to do certain things, mostly lock in innovation and be able to create it at scale. I come from the Department of Defense. If I want to purchase something in the Department of Defense, I have to use this thing called the Federal Acquisition Requirements. There's some exceptions to that, but for the purposes of the vast majority of what the government purchases, whether I'm in the Department of Defense or Department of Homeland Security or Department of State, I have to use a series of rules. This comes from the Defense Acquisition University. So first thing I need is a concept or need, and then I pick a path. Right here are the 5 paths that you can go to under the Federal Acquisition Requirements. So if I have a novel idea that could create value, I pick a path to purchase it and develop it, and then I go into this really easy ABC, right? And I move through what are called milestones. So I generate a requirement, I validate the requirement, I create a prototype, I engineer it, I scale it, I test it, and I deploy it. But that is what it really looks like. This is a joke. It's called the horse blanket because it looks like one of those horse blankets with all the little diamonds and stuff on it, and it's big enough to cover a horse. Each one of these steps in here is a person, is a document, and probably a different organization between everything. This is the bureaucracy that the Department of Defense and the federal government delivers innovation through. And this is what I started banging my head up against a long time ago.
So typically, how long does that process take?
That process, depending upon what it is, but in general, it aligns with the budget cycle for Congress. Budget cycle for Congress is plans for every 6 years. However, that 6 years is for requirements development and funding. This entire cycle, which actually goes through operational support, is about a 20-year cycle. It's about 3 years to analyze the requirements. It's 2 to 3 years to develop a prototype. It's another 3 years to put it in production, and that's what's called your initial production. Full production will be about at that 20-year point. That's when it's fully implemented and out there.
So it takes 20 years to innovate.
It takes 20 years to generate an innovative idea and create a product that represents that innovative idea. I see you're turning green over there.
Yes.
So, the question I asked was why. Instead of just being frustrated, I asked the question, why would anybody in their right mind design this?
Safety.
Safety. Any other answers?
Fear of failure.
Fear of failing.
Accountability of money.
Accountability of money.
Getting it perfect.
Say that again?
Getting it perfect.
Getting it perfect.
Limiting liability.
Limiting liability. What I did was I actually went back about 40,000 years and was like, how do people make stuff? People with good intentions made the system that we're in. So how did we originally do that? So between about 40,000 years ago and about 10,000 years ago, prehistory, before people were writing, if you wanted to make something, you basically had to do it yourself. You came up with the concept, you gathered the materials, and you made it. And then the next person who wants to make something does that by themselves. Well, eventually, people can talk. They start sharing ideas. You find out that Grog over here makes arrows much better than me, and I make bows much better than him. So why don't we split this up? He makes the arrows, I make the bows. This is great. This is good. So the next thing we end up doing is we end up specializing. If you think about it, every time you go into one of those art shows that you walk around, those craft shows, this way of producing things is still in effect. A single person going through and doing everything. And eventually, we have areas and people who are specialized. And so we create trade routes and we create markets. And so this is a way of dividing up labor, right? The people who have the resources and can do things well, do it, and instead of making it myself, I just trade with you. What happens when things get really complex? It's no longer the ability for one person's knowledge in one generation to be able to create something as beautiful as a cathedral. And so what happens is you start having to organize knowledge. And the way that you organize knowledge in societies at this time that didn't have the ability to write things down is you develop a system of memorization and the ability to pass on information over a lifespan of people. This is called a guild. A guild, you walk in as a child as young as 7 in your apprenticeship. In your teens, you may move up to journeyman, and eventually you may move up to being a master. But that entire process of memorizing the knowledge of whatever your craft is, be it masonry or carpentry, it takes an entire lifetime. And it's completely verbal. It's what you can hold in your mind. But with the knowledge of literacy and being able to write, you get a different organization of knowledge, the university. Here we have Oxford, founded in 1096. At the same time that these guilds are operating in memorization, you have the nobility class is writing things down. And at the same time, you have the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church, their entire job during this period of time was they were Xerox machines. The number one income source of the Catholic Church at this time, aside from land and property and taxes, was copying manuscripts. And the reason is you did not have the dissemination of knowledge to different people in order to take what they discover in the universities and push that out. Right now, we still live this. We still walk in as a freshman in our undergraduate and walk out a senior. We still have undergraduate, master's, and doctorate, and we still wear funny robes and hats from this time. Look, 1096. So the function of a university, I hope I convinced you, is the same as it's been for years. The organization works, and it has worked into modern society. So we're going to take a second here. What's the difference between the guild structure and what's the difference between a university structure? And it really becomes a hierarchy. If you are in the aristocrat class, you were taught to read and write, and you were able to go to university. If you're in the working class, you ended up in a guild. And that was by design. In fact, back here in about 380 BC, we've got a guy named Plato. Plato wrote an essay called The Republic, and it was the idea of the ideal society and how to structure that society. And within that, let me step back. The ideal society for him was to have a group of people who could think all day and think about how society should be structured, the philosopher kings. You had laborers who would be free from having to think about all these things, and they could just labor and go through their day-to-day business. And then there's a third class, which were sort of enablers. And he said this will only work if we can convince society of what's called the noble lie. And the noble lie is this, that you are brought into this world by the gods at this time in one of 3 categories. You're either brought in a gold category, this noble philosopher category, or the silver category, this sort of mid-level one, or the iron and bronze, which is the farmers and other craftsmen. And he said, you should structure society in this way where there's different castes. And so what happened? Society structured itself. And you had the Dark Ages. And you have the church, where you have the princes of the church. And you have the normal people. And you have guilds. And you have universities. So keep thinking about this as you go on, that this was a deliberate decision by society to divide us up and divide up the labor of society. Come on. So as you might expect, People only could put up that for like 1,000 years or so. In the 17th and early 18th century, philosophers started casting off this concept of a caste society and started talking about the equality of man. And so what I have up here is I have two prominent thinkers in that area. One is Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and the other is Jean Locke. Both of them came up with the concept of a social contract, that society contracts with the people of the society in order to do things. And generally a government will contract. So for the military, right, Department of Defense, that contract is I agree to give up taxes and some freedoms, and some of my people will go and participate in the military in order to get the common defense. We pay our taxes, give up some of our money for roads, to ensure interstate commerce. And so the first two societies to cast off this caste structure and create democracies were the French in the French Revolution, and this is the French Constitution here, and the Americans in the American Revolution, who created the US Constitution, which is a social contract. At the same time, you had a scientific revolution. About this time, there was no science in the late 17th century and the early 18th century. Everything was philosophy. And most of the philosophy in the Western world was focused around proving that God exists and the soul. And so if you read a lot of these treaties, or a lot of these essays and stuff that came out of this time, everything that you do had to prove the existence of God. Anybody know who René Descartes is? Cartesian system. I got some mathematicians here. Founder of calculus. In my opinion, he is the founder of calculus, not Mr. Newton over here. René, anybody here? Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. That's the first half of his essay. Do you know what the second half of the essay is? I think, therefore I am. Therefore, the devil cannot be deceiving me, and therefore there must be a God. If there is a devil, there must be a God. It is the worst defense of God. There's some really good ones out there. This is not one. But cogito ergo sum is very important. Sir Isaac Newton, took the concepts of Sir Francis Bacon, the scientific method, and applied them and created science. And so the application of the scientific method to the natural world is a way of ordering the world in order to do the things that we want to do, which led to the Industrial Revolution. The application of science to the organizing of society allowed us to create things like the printing press and create things like steam engines. Now, with a steam engine, you aren't tied into human and animal labor, right? The energy is not human energy, it's now steam energy. I can apply science. Do you know what all these smokestacks are? This is London. Those smokestacks are tied into textile plants. The Jacquard loom, which is the first example of programming. A lady named Ada Lovelace created the first algorithm, and the algorithm was designed to create patterns for textiles, which can then be physically programmed into these machines driven by steam engines. So we still had this aspect of craftsmanship, and we were going through and we're thinking, okay, how do I make things more efficient, right? One person shouldn't have to have the knowledge of the end-to-end system. And so what Henry Ford came up with during the American Industrial Revolution was the concept of an assembly line. And that idea was, instead of one person having to know everything about every task, we divide the tasks up, and one person has to know a little bit and become very specialized in one portion, and I move it from person to person. Again, we're trying to figure out how to share knowledge and how to divide up labor. And as we do this, we're starting to make some amazing things. We're starting to roll cars off here at $40 a piece. So here's the awesome, this is my favorite thing in the world. At the turn of the 20th century, the entire world was just in the science craze. They're trying to figure out how many different ways can apply the scientific method to different things. So we had the Industrial Revolution, which is scientific method applied to manufacturing. We had communism, fascism, which is the scientific method applied to the organization of society and economics. We had eugenics. Eugenics was the scientific application to the breeding of human beings. And some of those are positive, some of those are negative. We're human beings, we're not always perfect. So going back to 1723, you had a guy named Adam Smith. Adam Smith proposed that we divide society up into groups and divide the work between different groups. So he created the structure of society as an economic theory. Frederick Taylor applied the scientific method to management. Anybody ever seen the movie Cheaper by the Dozen? So Cheaper by the Dozen, the father of 13 children has to do everything efficiently. So he teaches his kids to button their shirts from the bottom to the top instead of the top to the bottom, or vice versa. I can't remember what was in the movie, right? The character in that novel was actually based upon Frederick Taylor. Max Weber, we talked about earlier, theory of bureaucracy. This is a way of organizing people. Scientific method applied to to society, creating the social sciences. Peter Drucker was the original business consultant. He applied all these different principles and theory to business, and then went around and wrote books and talked about it. Thomas Kuhn, Structure of Scientific Revolutions, talking about scientific revolutions. How does technology enter society, and how does science affect that, right? This is where you get the concept of the paradigm shift. Enough people believe it, and then society moves to it. And over here, this is my man, Lockheed Martin employee Winston Royce, managing the development of large software systems, created the waterfall software development method in 1970. And in 1984, the US military would create a mill standard that would indoctrinate waterfall as the way to do software development in the US military, and which would be adopted by all industry. Again, in his paper he goes, this is one way of doing software development. It's got some problems. In the late 80s, well, let me go back about. In the 80s and the early 90s, we had a problem in manufacturing. Problem in manufacturing was that we were developing things, we were able to push them out, but they were low quality. 1 out of 100 grenades in Vietnam may have been a dud. That's not acceptable. And so what we ended up having people do was apply the scientific method to quality. This right here is the Total Quality Management Master Plan, 1990, for the Department of Defense. This was an application of Adam Short's Plan, Do, Study, Act. Deming and Jurin were a couple of the folks who were quality experts. Who were Deming, Jurin, and Short? Well, they were mathematicians and physicists who worked in World War II on artillery. And during the reconstruction of Japan, Deming and Jurin got pulled to Japan to help the Japanese reestablish their manufacturing base after it was decimated by the firebombing of Tokyo and by the 2 atomic bombs the United States put on it. and they developed a quality management system, which has been branded several different things: Total Quality Management, Lean Six Sigma. There's an ISO 9000 series, International Standards Organization. And there was even at a time the Federal Quality Institute, which was killed in the mid-90s by the Clinton administration, leaving a whole bunch of quality management consultants out there to go and bring Lean Six Sigma to the masses.
Did they not feel like Total Quality Management was producing quality consulting?
So,
Fiercely ironic.
so the problem with quality management, and if you read the first chapter of Total Quality Management, it says that we are making a conscious decision to trade time and cost for quality. And chapter 2 is the culture change plan for Total Quality Management. Total Quality Management was the single largest cultural change effort, in my opinion, ever formally done in the world. And it was the most successful because all of the Department of Defense, all of the federal government, and all of industry became quality managers in the 1990s. Well, now what? Everything in society has been structured around trading cost and time for quality. Well, that's just not going to work. So in 2001, you start seeing the cracks come through, and we're focusing on software development here. Start seeing agile manufacturing as practiced in the Toyota method, remember Deming, make its way into software development. And you see over here, this is the manifesto for Agile Software Development, agilemanifesto.org. Individuals and interactions take precedence over process and tools. See kind of that's pushing back on quality management. Working software takes precedence over comprehensive documentation, right? Don't spend so much time writing things down, just do it. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. Bring human beings back into the mix. Human beings are the number one source of error and risk in a quality management system. So if you can design human beings out of the process by building robust requirements, implementing things like human factors engineers who study people and average out what people should do and are now the experts, you can eliminate people from the whole process. It's going to work great. Responding to change over following a plan. So what happens if things get mixed up? Just respond to it. And it's not that we don't care about those other things. We don't care about quality management. In fact, agile software developers are the best implementers of Lean Six Sigma that there are. It's just that we don't think that we are getting what we want out of these long development cycles. So here's my joke time. What do you get when you combine bacon and a fighter pilot? This is a bigger hit in military audiences, but... Oh yeah, that's what you get. The scientific method, Sir Francis Bacon, observe, question, hypothesis, experiment, and analysis, conclusion. Keep doing that. With a guy named Colonel John Boyd. Now, if you don't know who Colonel John Boyd is, so we haven't introduced him, he was a fighter pilot in the Vietnam area. And his concept was, if you're fighting, the faster you can observe, orient yourself with the enemy, decide what to do, and act, the faster you can go through that cycle, the better your chances of defeating the enemy. It's called getting inside your enemy's OODA loop. So if I take the scientific method of deliberate observation and hypothesis testing, and I add it to, let's do this at speed, I get the lean startup. You might know who this guy on the right is, aside from the guy on the right is Steve Blank. Steve Blank is one of the founders with Pete Newell and a couple other guys of Hacking for Defense out of Stanford. I was fortunate enough to be a problem sponsor for the first Hacking for Defense in Stanford. My team was awesome. All the other teams suck. Capella Space is actually pitching out. Capella Space is a company, the most successful company I'd say, in Hacking for Defense history, is down in Colorado Springs right now in an accelerator with the Air Force at Catalyst Campus, and it's pitching out tomorrow.
They're a $200 million company now.
They are a $200 million company, came out of a class a lot like the ones they're done here at CU. And if you haven't done Hacking for Defense, or you're calling it
Designing for
Design Defense, do it. So the whole concept of lean startup is don't spend a lot of money and a lot of time in developing a finished product until you validate it with the customer. So everything that you do is an experiment, it's a hypothesis. I think if I develop this, it will solve this person's pain point. You do a minimum viable product. MVP. What's the cheapest way I can demonstrate validity, right? Can I put a Google ad up and see how many people click on it? Can I do this on a piece of paper instead of actually coding software? You measure it. You actually have metrics, and you learn. You either persevere if it works, or you pivot off it and try something else. That's just the scientific method. But the key here, Steve Blank was enlisted in the Air Force. And so he applied John Boyd to it and said, do this as fast as you possibly can. Leads to DevOps. DevOps is separate from Agile. It's an application of culture to the Agile process. This is Jez Humble. Jez Humble is one of the guys who signed the original Agile manifesto. And this is Colonel Enrique Odi. I worked with Colonel Odi at Defense Innovation Unit. He developed the first Agile software development factory in the Air Force.
And that was in 2018?
It was in 2018, 7 years after the Agile Manifesto was going there. The Department of Defense and the federal government is severely behind because the Department of Defense does quality management. And if you think back to the horse blanket, that is a waterfall process from our friend at Lockheed Martin that has been indoctrinated into the bureaucracy. So how do you deliver innovation in bureaucracy? How do you say this is a better way of doing things? So remember I said technology is easy, people are hard. These pictures up here are from my personal network of defense innovators. You might see some people in this room. You might bump into some people from Ensign. Those folks are around here. From the Defense Innovation Unit. I've got people in commercial companies up here. I've got students up here. In fact, my Hacking for Defense team is right down here. I sent them to Japan to hang out with a 3-star admiral for 2 days. The answer is because what we're doing with technology is inherently a people system. We're inherently solving problems for people, whether that's through a social contract. For the Department of Defense, that's to defend people, to help people prosper. We do technology for a reason, and we do technology for people. And people will solve this. So if there's one thing that you guys should take out of here, is the reason why you're in cyber technology and policy is because you understand it's not about making the newest widget. Innovation isn't just widgets. It's not about delivering a widget to market, because unless you have created change, unless you've created value, you have not done anything. Bureaucracy is your friend, because once you create that innovation, if you wrap it in a package of policy and you wrap it in a package of process, you can then scale that and it will last for millennia. Understand how to do innovation and understand how to do bureaucracy. Understand where we came from. These people that you see, that I've showed you, all did what they did because they thought it was the best for the time that they're in. But their time is over. These people and you are the next generation. You are the people who are going to change things. So what's next? When I think about management, I think about three things. I think about the energy it takes to do something. I think about the thought and the knowledge it takes to do something. And then there's another one that I mixed in here, which is the social good, right? How do I have to organize to be able to do it? And so the path we just went on, if you go up here in the upper left-hand side, is to make something. It started off 40,000 years ago. It took human energy and human intelligence. Then we had the guild structure, moved to human energy plus shared intelligence, guilds and universities. Then we moved to shared energy and shared intelligence, right? That's the university model. Then machine energy, shared intelligence. We added machines to the mix. Now it's not dependent upon what I can do. Next we moved to machine energy and machine intelligence. We're able to put knowledge into a machine and get it back. And we're still using machines and energy, cars, engines, whatever, to make things and augment. What I'll submit to you as my last thing to think about, where you're going, is you're going into augmented energy and augmented intelligence. We've gone to the point where man and machine cannot continue to operate separately. It doesn't work. Having a process over here that at the end of the day doesn't deliver a net good for human beings doesn't work. And so through artificial intelligence, through increasing processing power, through taking design and putting it in front of your DevOps process, for designing for human needs, we're really looking at man-machine teaming for the first time. And we'll do that in a networked way, which augments our energy, not just with a machine, but with a network of machines, and a network of energy sources, and a network of knowledge. In this new world, it's no longer what you know, it's who you know and how you can get there. And it's how fast you can turn that over. The Department of Defense is now moving from human speed to machine speed. The next war that will be won by the organization that can take their OODA loop, their decision loop, get it away from people, and have machines do it. And that's absolutely terrifying. However, the way that you counter machine speed decision making and an augmented energy, augmented intelligence is by doing it better, doing it faster. The last thing I'll say, the people in this room, not me, not the professors here, the people in this room are going to be the ones who fulfill that social contract to protect and defend the United States of America or your home country or the world, to ensure free trade and to ensure that society is the best it can be. Because through cybersecurity, through technology, and God help us, through policy, that is how we're going to create the next couple slides here and move into the next generation. So I'm not even sure how much time I took, but
45.
Man, we got about 15 minutes for discussion and questions.
So before we do that, let's thank our speaker, please. And technically provocative. The university is stuck up there at shared energy, shared intelligence. And the evolution model, I'm sorry. Are there any questions, comments, assertions, philosophical entreaties that the audience has before I do what I was about to do? Oh.
Come on, I'm not a scary guy.
I have a question. So in a more, you've seen a lot of companies come, be successful, innovate, win. You've seen companies come and die. How do students in this room prepare for that world with a little more granularity in terms of, let's say I wanted to go out in the world and make some money in a cybersecurity
Right.
business. And what you sort of implied is, and I agree, is there's a disconnect between the typical university system and the needs of the new economy. So what do students do to succeed in a world that you've described here?
So number one, knowledge is ubiquitous. In many cases, you do not need a university to provide you knowledge.
Stop.
Hold on, I've got a but there. You do not need a university to provide you knowledge. You need a university to teach you how to find knowledge and how to collaborate with your friends. The collegiate experience and the way of thinking about problems is what the university experience, in my opinion, should be turning to. Because it's no longer a need to know, it's no longer an organization you have to come to get information. I could look up my entire calculus curriculum online right now, right? There are some, if I want cutting edge, I need to come back. But the first thing is that an understanding from the universities that knowledge isn't what's important. Teaching people how to be thinkers and how to work collaboratively, even across disciplines, which is why this place is awesome, is more important than anything else. Second, the startup economy is a dog-eat-dog world. You will likely, statistically, be in a startup that fails. And guess what? Once you've done that, now you're in the game. Until you fail the startup, you haven't learned anything. And so the concept in the startup realm in cybersecurity is try things, see if they work. But when you hear the Silicon Valley mantra, fail fast, fail early, fail often, you forget the last one is learn always. Because what happens is when that startup fails, immediately for $25, they're going to go and create another LLC or corporation and try again with the knowledge they had. So think about your experience in the new economy as a series of experiences that create learning that drive you towards an end goal. Go ahead.
So coming back to the bureaucracy piece, we assign contracts, we being the government, the military, large corporations, etc. We assign contracts to the people that understand the system, who have the insurance to fulfill the requirements, who meet the 51% female ownership by whatever means necessary. That sort of game, how do you make that more attractive to startups who actually are doing Agile versus the players that are always there who are still using the waterfall method?
So there's a big, it's a big debate right now. In the federal government, 2 weeks ago, there was a conference called the Acquisition X Conference, held at Defense Acquisition University, trying to think through ways of changing this. I think that for a bureaucracy, in order to receive any change, there must be a corresponding cultural change. So I'm waiting for the indicator that the defense acquisition space has actually created change. One of the things that gives me hope, the Air Force has what they call an open topic SIBR, Small Business Innovation Research Grant. So instead of having to wait for a topic to come in to get that initial seed investment from the federal government for your technology, you can just apply with whatever idea, and then they will find out, they will look through it and see if it's something they want. They flip the script. The other thing is they're starting to drive down the times for award, right? They do a lot of due diligence up front, but when it comes to giving you an award, they will literally swipe a credit card in front of you. The Defense Innovation Unit and several consortiums, groups of companies, are doing something called Other Transaction Authorities. Other Transaction Authorities actually came out of NASA in 1959. in order to meet John F. Kennedy's proposal that we go to the moon. They couldn't go to the moon with the acquisition system they had. You're seeing the same thing in the commercial sector and the universities, right? A lot of social programs have created policy that, for good intent, has bogged down the system. And so what I propose is, this is a Clay Christensen thing. If you haven't read Clay Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma, highly recommend it. Talks about how Kodak invented the digital camera and then was killed because they never productized the digital camera. Somebody else did. And they were so stuck in their film business. And he proposes, and he's got a series of books after this, he proposes that for innovation to occur, it cannot occur in the bureaucracy, it'll kill it. So you have to spin it off and create it outside, then readopt it into the company, and with it, you'll readopt some of the methodologies that allow that technology to thrive. So where it comes to acquisitions, I'm a big fan, and the reason why my innovation definition is not just about things, it's about processes as well. Creating a acquisitions innovation organization that has special authorities to try out new ways of doing that. And so what you can do is you can actually create in a small space, a sandbox, a concept that can then be adopted by the large organization. But don't try to do it within the organization. They're just going to, the antibodies will come out and kill you like white blood cells. Go ahead.
You touched slightly on DevOps in your presentation.
Yeah.
And I work in the bureaucracy. So, and that entity of DevOps came on board about 6 months ago in a large fashion. What do you foresee in my organization? How is that going to develop into innovation and help my department?
Yeah. So let me go back real quick. So you see in the corners here, continuous integration, user-centered design, continuous development, and test-driven development. If your organization is implementing DevOps and it does not have those four things, your DevOps effort is going to fail. So go through them really quick. Let's start with user-centered design. User-centered design uses human-centered design thinking methodologies. You basically find out what a user's pain point is, the actual user, not a proxy for a user. You talk to them, you design to fulfill those needs, and then you test it with that actual user. So if you don't have designers on your team or people who are assigned to talk to users, that's going to be a problem. Continuous integration and continuous development. So this is taking those big long waterfall charts of development and breaking them down into small chunks. A method of doing DevOps is Scrum. Scrum goes for 2-week chunks. You don't have to do it. You can do Kanban, right? The whole principle is you take your work in progress and you make the work in progress small so that it's visible. You know what you're working on. You know it's having a problem. If there's an issue, you don't move on until that problem's been addressed. And it's time bounded. So that actually reduces your average risk over time. That's a whole nother discussion on how DevOps reduces risk. But you need to have this continuous development methodology, not waterfall development. Continuous integration. You have a production environment and you have a development environment. The development environment and the production environment are as close to each other as possible. They only differ in the work that is being done right now in this sprint. And so if you have a versioned production environment and you don't deliver until you've packaged up everything that possibly goes in the release, you're not doing DevOps, you're not going to succeed. Because the concept, again, is the things I'm delivering to my users only differ from what I'm doing production by the amount of work I'm doing right now. And that reduces risk again. Again, we're talking about quality management. This is a quality management concept. Test-driven development. Write the tests before you write the code. You need to know what you're designing for, and you need to go down here, take your testers, bring them in, and say, what will get us acceptance?
I think they got the two left parts, but they left out the user-centered design,
They
and that's
always leave out
causing a
the
lot of
people.
pain. So,
They always leave out the people. And so what?
What organization for that?
Department of Veterans Affairs.
Okay.
Yeah. And I know some folks who've done a lot of stuff with the VA, some software development work, the SO company, and Fearless Technologies, who are really driving Veterans Affairs from a human-centered design perspective. But all you really need is, even if you don't have a designer in your team, have somebody who's looking at user-centered design and is developing user stories and user profiles and using that methodology, and you'll get closer.
That's key.
Other questions?
Yeah, it seems like human beings, these people in the room, are the agents for change. Because there are certainly organizations, for example, Veteran Affairs, where they may have 3 of these or think they have 2 of them and think that they're proceeding down a path. But your prediction is high probability of failure because something's missing. And they don't know. The culture doesn't acknowledge that something may be missing.
Right.
And so, but then if you're in the organization, you're going to have to fight this constant uphill battle to try to make the change. And they're not going to spin off an organization, let's call it Veterans Affairs 2.
Right.
Because, I mean, and so how does this work? Or does it?
So we talked about Lean Startup. Eric Ries wrote The Lean Startup. Highly recommend that book. What you do within your organization is you build minimum viable products as cheaply as possible to prove the concept. Once people have it in their hands, they can understand it. And that's a way of spinning things off, right? Is if I can just say, okay, for this 1 hour, just imagine that things can be differently. And here is a product. Here is a flip chart that has the different ways of working through this that we conceptualize, right? That is a very strong way of bringing that in. The other thing is I'm a huge advocate for human-centered design thinking methodologies. I've used them in my consultancy. I use them at scale. I did a 300-person Army event for synthetic training environments. I've done 80 people events for Army's talent management group. I've done digital transformation with 90 plus people. Human-centered design gives you more techniques to manage the people and the thoughts and the emotions and the social interactions within your organization. So the number one thing I would say is we've become too technology focused, and we need to flip back and start bringing human beings back into the system, because the hypothesis in quality management that removing people from the system will drive down risk is false. Going online?
Example, organization that has a applicable that we all might know of, that might be augmented and how will they change the organization?
Yeah, the two organizations. Okay, so the question was, can I give an example of an organization that is adaptable? Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. The two ones that come to me come from a kind of a software perspective, Amazon and Netflix. So let's go with Netflix. So when I was at DIUX, we worked with venture capital firms. Got the story from a partner at Andreessen Horowitz. And if you didn't know, Andreessen Horowitz is one of the largest venture capital firms in the world, let alone Silicon Valley. And they're a major investor in Netflix. And so Netflix has had about 4 different business models, right? Some of us remember getting delivered DVDs, right? They're trying to break the Blockbuster model. Then they had a hybrid model, right? DVDs plus delivery. Then they went to just online delivery. and they pioneered the content creation model, which is what everybody else is working on right now. Now, when Netflix makes a business change, they tie 60% of their entire business compensation to making that change, which means all bonuses, all workforce, the entire 60% of the entire workforce gets reallocated to making the change. And it's not working on externally facing products. It is, I'm taking away from this externally facing product, I'm turning it inside, and we're making the internal changes to go to the next thing. So one, Netflix makes the investment. Two, Netflix has amazing cycle time in their DevOps. Netflix will release over 1,000, even more, over 1,000 releases per day. Every single time that a Netflix programmer hits submit on a line of code, it goes through an entire automated testing chain, gets validated automatically, gets checked, and without a person in the loop, gets pushed into production. Every line of code is a sprint. Every line of code is production. The difference between the development environment and the production environment at Netflix is 1/1000th of a day. It is one line of code of work. And so how much risk and variation is there? If something doesn't work, you know immediately. The other thing is, Netflix is not afraid to blow up their own process. Who here has ever heard of Chaos Monkey? Oh, Chaos Monkey, one of my favorite things in the world. So cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is so important in Netflix that they put a dedicated red team on it. A red team is a team that's dedicated to attacking your own system. And this red team, normally when you have a red team, they'll announce when they come in. No, this red team was coding on that same production environment that I was talking about, on that same development environment. They're coding alongside everybody else. And they're coding attacks onto the system. So who here has ever had Netflix go into Spanish on them? You had that. Who's ever had it like crash and then come back up?
Why'd you laugh at
Netflix continuously attacks its own programs. Those are not glitches. They're very likely Chaos Monkey attacking the system. And so what has happened is they train their developers not to develop perimeter defenses, but to actively go in and counter these attacks. And pretty soon, the developers get smart. They start anticipating. They're like, oh, these guys are going to do a denial of service. So they go, here's what I need to do. As soon as I detect a denial of service, I'm going to do a swap over to a different server. Right? Bam. Isolate. They have containers. Because they set up this adversarial relationship and they continuously test for the worst, they are more resilient than anything else. Take what the Department of Defense does. Department of Defense builds the biggest, most pristine wall with all, and they keep on checking to make sure all the chain links are there. But they never check to see if somebody just dug under there or somebody's been there in the building the whole time, right? For cybersecurity, and I did some cybersecurity work, I would recommend that you assume that you are compromised at all times, and you build your system assuming that the adversary is inside your system and is doing bad things. And even better, do the bad things to yourself before they can do it to you. Does that answer your question? Amazon's got a very similar thing. They just shut down their last Oracle server, so now they're running all on their own internal server. And my other thing is with Amazon Cloud and all cloud services, we had a discussion earlier about data centers. Will data centers be going away at any time? No, because when you're on the cloud, you're just on somebody else's data center.
It's after 5 o'clock. Let's thank our speaker. He will stay around for several minutes. I still believe that universities have a place, please.
I did say that.
And fantastically provocative. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Wonderful presentation. So then how do universities innovate? How do we Okay. You're gonna create the simple